The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was not built for human eyes. Its ceiling arched 300 meters overhead, carved from a single asteroid of translucent obsidian that had been hollowed out over 6 millennia. Inside, bioluminescent veins pulsed with slow, cold light, violet and silver, the colors of authority, the colors of distance. 37 species sat arrayed in concentric rings, each representative elevated on a dais shaped to accommodate their anatomy. Creatures with 14 limbs. Creatures with no visible face. Creatures that communicated exclusively in subsonic vibrations that made the floor hum. And at the very center, standing on a small circular platform no larger than a modest human bedroom, stood Ethan Cross. He was, by any objective measurement, unremarkable. Average height for a human male. Dark hair, short and practical. A single diplomatic sash across a plain gray uniform. No translation crown, no holographic shield, no ceremonial armor. He carried nothing but a thin datapad and the quiet weight of 12 billion people who had never seen a star up close. The council had summoned him. That was the formal word, summoned. As if humanity were a minor clerk called before a board of directors. As if the species that had crossed the void in combustion-powered steel tubes, that had pulled atoms apart with their bare mathematics and rebuilt them into light, as if that species were simply being invited to explain itself. Ethan had read the briefing 47 times on the transit shuttle. He could recite it in his sleep. He chose not to think about it now. 2. The accusation. High Counselor Zyrex Thorn rose from the central dais. He was tall by his species standard, the Vreth stood naturally at nearly 2.5 meters, and his ceremonial robes added another layer of engineered intimidation. 6 iridescent eyes caught the chamber light. His voice, when he spoke, was translated into every language simultaneously by the Council's ancient harmonic array, filling the air from all directions at once. Ethan Cross, diplomatic envoy of the human sovereignty. You stand before the Galactic Council on a matter of gravest concern. Your species has, in the span of 3 standard centuries, a period we consider barely a rounding error in the sweep of galactic history, colonized 11 star systems, established 17 trade corridors without filing the required permits, reverse-engineered Vreth slipstream technology from salvage, which we note was specifically prohibited under the Keshri Accords, and most recently, repelled the Devourer fleet at the Orion threshold. A fleet, I will remind this chamber, that the combined forces of the Galactic Council declared undefeatable 40 years ago. We abandoned 3 inhabited systems to them. He paused. Every eye's compound, singular, sensory cluster, turned toward Ethan. We require an explanation. What exactly are you? The harmonic array fell silent. 312 alien minds waited. Ethan Cross looked up at Zyrex Thorn. He didn't check his datapad. He didn't clear his throat or adjust his sash or perform any of the 12 micro-behaviors that a lesser diplomat might have used to buy a second of composure. He simply looked at the High Counselor the way a person looks at a door they've walked through 100 times. Then he spoke. The 3 words that silenced the galaxy. We don't stop. 3. The silence. The harmonic array translated the phrase in 0.003 seconds. Every species in the chamber received it in their native cognition language simultaneously. And then, nothing. Not the rustling of 37 species shifting in their seats. Not the subsonic hum of the floor vibration speakers. Not even the slow, ancient breath of the ventilation systems that had been cycling this same air for 6,000 years. Just silence. Zyrex Thorn's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a Vreth behavior associated with deep processing, the equivalent of a human blinking rapidly in surprise. He had prepared for this session for 4 standard months. His advisors had generated 163 possible human responses, ranging from elaborate justification to political deflection to outright aggression. They had modeled probabilities, assigned weights, prepared counter-arguments for every conceivable answer. None of their models had included this. 3 words. Present tense. No caveat, no apology, no citation of circumstance. Not we were provoked, or we had no choice, or we respectfully submit for the Council's consideration. Simply a statement of nature, delivered with the same casual certainty one might use to describe the color of the sky. The Keshri representative, a vast, slow creature that communicated through shifting patterns of chromatophores across its shell, produced a color sequence that the translation array rendered as, "It is telling the truth." That is not defiance. That is description. The Delvari delegate, a species so ancient they remembered when the Vreth were still a pre-spaceflight civilization, made a sound deep in its thorax. After a moment, the array offered a translation: amusement. Recognition. Ethan stood still at the center of it all, hands loose at his sides, watching Zyrex Thorn the way a mountain watches weather pass over it. 4. What the High Counselor understood. Zyrex Thorn had governed the Galactic Council for 119 years. He had overseen the admission of 4 new species, the expulsion of 2, and the collective treaty that had, mostly, ended the 6th Border Wars. He was not a being who was easily moved by rhetoric. He had heard the greatest orators of 6 dozen civilizations speak in this chamber. But those 3 words settled into him differently. Because he understood, suddenly, the terrible and magnificent truth of what Ethan Cross had just described. Not a boast. Not a threat. Simply a natural law, the same way one might describe water flowing downhill. Humans did not stop. They had been stopped, certainly, by physics, by biology, by disaster, by each other. They had been set back and disease-ridden and self-destructive in ways that had made other species write them off as a failed experiment half a dozen times. The Devourer fleet had calculated a 98.7% probability of human extinction and committed their full force accordingly. And humanity had looked at that calculation, apparently, and disagreed. We don't stop. Not we cannot be stopped. That would have been arrogance. This was something quieter and far more unsettling. It was a description of an internal state. A quality of will so fundamental that it had never occurred to Ethan Cross that it required explanation, the same way a fish, asked what its strategy was for staying wet, might simply look at you and say, "I swim." Zyrex Thorn sat down slowly. Around the chamber, the silence continued its strange, spreading quality, like light filling a room. After 63 seconds, an eternity by Council protocol, the High Counselor spoke again. His voice, usually a precision instrument of authority, was measured in a new register. And the Devourers? They committed their entire fleet. You had 1/8 their tonnage, 1/3 their crew complement, and outdated slipstream drives that your own engineers had flagged as structurally compromised. Your projections showed a 12% survival probability for your defensive force. Ethan Cross tilted his head slightly. 12% is not 0, he said. And if 3 words had silenced the chamber, those 4 words cracked something inside it. Because every species in that room, from the most ancient to the newest, had a version of the same calculus, the point at which the math became conclusive and survival became statistically negligible, and the rational choice was retreat, or surrender, or at minimum, the acknowledgement of defeat as a logical framework. Humans apparently did not have that calculus. Or if they did, they had wired it to fire at 0. Precisely at 0. Only at 0. 12% was not 0. So they had fought. After the session. The formal session ended without the censure resolution that the Vreth delegation had originally filed. It was quietly withdrawn. In its place, a new agenda item was logged under Emergency Procedures, Review of Humanity's Status Classification, Provisional Full Membership Candidacy. As the chamber emptied, Zyrex Thorn descended from the central dais and walked, for the first time in his 119-year tenure, to the floor-level platform where a diplomatic envoy stood. Ethan Cross watched him approach without stepping back. "You understood what you were walking into today," Thorn said. "Not a question. Yes, Ethan said. You knew we had the authority to formally quarantine your species. To restrict your expansion by galactic treaty law. To effectively freeze human development at your current borders for the next 200 years while the Council deliberated. Yes. And you came anyway. With 3 words. Ethan Cross looked at the High Counselor of the Galactic Council, at the 6 ancient eyes that had witnessed more history than humanity's entire written record, and he allowed himself, for the first time today, the smallest suggestion of a smile. With the truth, he said. We find it's usually enough. Zyrex Thorn stood there for a long moment. The bioluminescent veins in the obsidian ceiling pulsed their slow violet light across both of them, the most powerful being in the known galaxy and one unremarkable human diplomat. Then the High Counselor did something that his 6 advisors, watching from the gallery, had never seen him do in 119 years. He nodded. Not the formal council nod of acknowledgement. Not the diplomatic nod of concession or the bureaucratic nod of procedural confirmation. The simple, honest nod of one being to another, across a gulf of 1,000,000 years of separate evolution, that meant, I understand you now. And I will not make the mistake of underestimating you again. Ethan Cross picked up his datapad. He had a report to file and a long transit shuttle back to the human border stations. 12 billion people were waiting for news. He gave the High Counselor one last look, steady, unhurried, carrying in it the same quality that had stopped 312 alien minds cold in an ancient chamber, the look of a species that had calculated the distance between here and impossible and simply decided to start walking. Then he walked out.